think about what you were saying about intention. I think that has so much to do with a lot of what happens with a lot of different situations, whether good or bad, or, and like you said before, like assigning it to the good, good or evil camp. Well, there's also this other, I think of it as like good, evil, and other, like question mark,
unassigned,
undetermined.
Yeah, no, I like that, and I really am. I resonate strongly with what you said about the idea that intention plays a role. I mean, so your mileage, like mine, certainly may vary on Stephen Greer. I think that's a polite way of saying it for me. But I talk to people who have done these CSETI meetings, who they're calling down UFOs with their minds or their intelligence, and it seems to have some degree of consistency in the way that it works, at least with them getting what appear to not be satellites and not be the space station and not be airplanes. I've talked to some people who are like, no, this was really strange. So there is an intentional component here, which, as you follow that rabbit hole, sort of leads you down into the world of, occultism and magic, which I never thought that I would take seriously. But once you sort of broaden that definition to be not like, people standing on mountaintops throwing thunderbolts at each other, once you broaden that definition to be more about gaming the nature of the universe, changing odds slightly in your favor. Because the example that I always hear is, well, why don't magicians win the lottery? Well, if you reduce the odds from 1,000,001 to 500,001, that's a great increase in your chances, but it still doesn't guarantee that it'll happen. If you start thinking about it that way, and in terms of the way that we can influence our surroundings with, psi phenomena, which do have some degree of verifiability in the laboratory, then you kind of have to say, well, maybe there's something to magic. I mean, we all know these people who just are able to be super confident and just stroll right through life, and we have no idea how they're able to do it. And, I kind of think that there might be some sort of light magic in that sort of magical sense, in terms of like making reality in the image that you have in your head. There might be something to that. That, and the fact that when I was when I was in college, I remember, despite being a Christian the entire time, I remember meeting atheist friends, and they were always the smartest and best read person in the room. And I'm like, man, that's confronting. But now that I'm in these circles that I travel in nowadays, it's always the occultist, right? like the magical guy is always the guy who's always the smartest and most read in the room. Not all magicians, but it's typically a magician who is that person, if that makes any sense. Just in terms of having a broad reading of, fringe science and Jung and philosophical constructs, it's typically an occultist now, in my experience. So, I think that intentionality is something that we take for granted a lot.
So, Josh, that leads me to another question. We're really diving deep here on intention and what that means in the conversation right now around the paranormal. But as far as intent goes, with like these encounters with these creatures, these Djinn, are people purposely seeking out encounters with these things? If someone's going to play with a Ouija board, they're probably going to get some kind of activity, right? If someone is doing a blood sacrifice or something and there's a pentagram involved and some words, I mean, there's obviously intent involved. But are we seeing any intent with people, I don't know if this is the right word, but conjuring these things into their space, or are things just happening on their own?
Well, that's a really, really good question. And I think part of it lies in sort of your interpretation. I have some friends of mine who are convinced that pretty much all paranormal things are not in your head, but they're from your head, if that makes any sense. So they are epiphenomena that are sort of byproducts of these sort of psychic effects. or even, somehow interfacing with whatever Jungian archetypes are, being the source code of the universe, something like that. I don't know. I don't like that explanation because it's kind of sad that it's just all us.
Right.
Even if it's us doing weird stuff, kind of makes me sad that it would just be all us. In terms of people who are, going out and asking to meet Djinn or something, I'm sure it happens. I think that the opportunity for those types of personalities to be in places to meet Djinn is not that prevalent. And what I mean by that is that the people who are in a position to go to places where there are rumors of Djinn being around typically are, Muslims, and are typically from the area, and they typically don't mess with this stuff. You don't have a bunch of 15-year-old white kids from Dayton, going out to the local Persian ruins and hanging out and calling it a Djinn.
Yeah, you're not going to have a paranormal group, take a tour bus out to the site and do an investigation necessarily.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's almost like with Western secularization, there's this attitude that, well, maybe this stuff doesn't exist, so it's okay to poke at it because it probably is not real anyway. You know what I mean? So that's why you do find people who are willing to spend the night on a ferry fort in Ireland, or who are willing to, hang out in the abandoned mental hospital with the Ouija board. And you're not likely to find people who are in more, traditionally religious, conservative religious cultures who are willing to go out and, mess with this stuff.
No, that's a good point, that you're not like out there poking it with a stick constantly, but you're aware,
exactly.
You're aware, and you respect the stories, you respect the space, and you stay away for the most part. That's a good point.
Well, I mean, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say there's several things on that list that I'm not going to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same reason that I don't have a Ouija board in my house, and I'm not going to. I think that probably 80% of these scary, spoopy Ouija board stories are, somebody's controlling the planchette and, whatever. But I do think there's a subset that is genuinely anomalous, and I think that I don't want to take the chance of that. I would imagine that a Ouija board is kind of like going through a bad neighborhood with your windows down or something. Like, just don't do it. But it reminds me of something that somebody who is younger, so not young, but younger, said to me when I was in Ireland. And they're like, of course I don't believe in fairies, but I'm scared of them. So it's that sort of risk mitigation system where, it's like, no, I don't believe in fairy folklore, but I'm not about to be caught dead, in the middle of a fairy fort at midnight.
It's like a coping mechanism, almost like, I'm not going to admit, because if I do, then that makes it a little bit more real.
Well, right. And then, you can imagine, again, if there is a reality to magic, which really means that there's a reality to consciousness phenomena, which is the one hill in the paranormal that I will die on, because there's, like I said, laboratory research at the 6 and 7 sigma level, which means that, if you engineer something at the 7 sigma level, and I'm sorry if I'm getting this wrong, anybody, but this is a pretty close approximation of what it means. If you engineer something at the 7 sigma level, it means that the part will fail like 1 out of a billion times or something along those lines. And you have these insane statistical thresholds for some of these, for some of this laboratory psychic research. Daryl Bim, Dean Braden, a lot of different people, to say nothing of some of the anecdotal stuff that other people have, collected. If these psychic effects that we all have are actually real, then who knows how much, years and years of hearing about this in your culture, how much, you might actually manifest something yourself, or you might, even if it's something as simple as, I went there and now I'm sick. I don't know why I'm sick. Well, you could be making yourself sick with your mind. Like, that's literally a thing. Placebo and nocebo, like, are real things. So yeah, I don't know. I guess that's where I fall on a lot of this stuff, is that I don't know if any